Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
Okay, so it's Ron Crabtree back here with our MetaPod audience around those three things that organizations struggle with, right? Is forever labor shortage. In fact, we have to figure out how to do more with less. Then the unending pressure, right, to digitization of work and digital transformation. And we're going to have Alan Willett introduce himself here in a moment. But Alan's one of these interesting people I've known for many years. And he's going to share some interesting perspectives around all three of those things with respect to how do we get more done, with our workforce? And how do we actually figure out the right things to attack from a digitization perspective? He'll take an interesting spin on this. You may not have heard about. Technical debt will be a term that he's going to mention. So whenever I, think of an organization that's struggling with, how quickly it can bring a product to market, be it software or products, or, getting teams to really come together and agree on it and move much more quickly, very complex processes like product development, I have Alan on my speed dial list. So Alan, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Ron. Happy to be here. I've been an engineer for a long time, but I've gotten into consulting, business consulting, a lot of different ways. So just a little bit of history. I wrote my first program as an engineer at 13 years old, about 51 years ago now, and it was on paper tape. So I've been watched the industry evolve, and I went into workforce to think after the right programs, but pretty soon I found myself leading large teams of people, and I didn't have time to write programs. They said to me, Alan, you don't have time to write programs now. As soon as you fix all the people problems, you can get to that code stuff. So I'm still working on that part, Ron, just so you know. So since then, I've written multiple books. The main two that are in the public are Leading with Speed and Leading the Unleadable. I've worked with startups and with very long-lived organizations. I've done work around the world from South Africa, India, etc., and lots of companies in the United States. A lot of it about digital transformation, for example. One of the big initiatives in South Africa, for example, I'm working with a trilogy of government, industry, and academia to really help South Africa do a complete digital transformation. So I'm delighted to be here. This will be fun.
Well, I see your logo here, Exceptional Difference. Could you just take another 30 seconds? What's digital difference all about? What do you guys do?
Well, thank you for asking. We were struggling to get the name for our company when we put together this version of the company. We realized what we were doing for companies is giving them that little bit of the exceptional difference that leads to extraordinary results. Because sometimes it's just a little tweak. And that little tweak means a billion. So that's what the exceptional difference is, that small difference between good and extraordinary.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Well, in that case, we're going to move into the first part of this podcast, which is really zeroing in on a diagnostic. And here Alan's going to share with us basically three diagnostics, if you will. So an organization should be thinking about, and you don't have to be an expert like Alan is in some of these areas. He's going to define it for us. But Alan's going to offer three different diagnostics to any organization facing these common three challenges the podcast is all about. What are three things we should be examining? Right? If these are threats, there's opportunity there, or there's something we have to understand that help us be able to diagnose whether or not that's something we need to address. And then in the last half of the podcast, we'll focus in on, okay, great. So what do you do? What's the practical go-do advice to go and do something if you determine you have those kinds of challenges? So with that, Alan, take us into your top three things you think organizations should be looking at.
Okay. I did prepare, but I'm going to add a little bit of spice today, so a secret ingredient. So here's the big two I'm going to be talking about, the wisdom gap and technical debt. The two together are pretty amazingly powerful problems and opportunities. So
let's start. Why don't we start there and just carefully define each of those so the audience knows what's running through your mind when you talk about wisdom gap, and then if you talk about technical debt. And I think if we do that first, so we have that as a basis for the rest of the conversation, that was quite helpful.
Awesome. So here's the wisdom gap. I've been running across this in the Department of Defense, but then I started to run across it in multiple other industries, automotive, and I've run across it in multiple organizations in South Africa, like the Energy District and many others. The wisdom gap is this. The innovation is driven often by the critical few. Here, let us drop back and define innovation for a second. Everybody knows this, but inventions are worthless unless they get out to the customers. Innovation is the ability to get the really cool ideas out to the customers. And often it's not technology that's a problem. It's knowing the whole system of how to get something out the door, from politics through process, as well as integrating into existing systems. And that's usually driven by a critical few people that understand all of that. And unfortunately, what organizations are facing is those critical few people are retiring, and there's a big gap between those retiring and those coming up that do not understand how to get stuff from concept to product.
And that would be your definition of the wisdom gap.
Absolutely. Organizations are calling it multiple things, by the way. Some people call it the bathtub. I find that one weird, but it's just like, this influx of people in the bathtub, people in between, and then there's this big gap. Other people are calling it the silver tsunami. I don't want to call it that. I appreciate the wisdom gap most of all, because that's what it really is. It's a wisdom to get something out the door, and there's a gap between the people leaving and the people coming in.
Okay.
That's wisdom gap. Any questions about that before I talk down?
And then how does that tie into this notion of technical debt then?
Technical debt is, let's say you have a really fancy, nice car, Okay, we'll go with one of the Teslas, for example, or, just a Porsche, go old school. And you lock behind it this big trailer full of lead weights. You're not going to go that fast, even though you have all that power. Technical debt is the burdens that an organization is starting to carry because of years of buildup of crud. You can see this in business re-engineering in some places. I bet your audience has heard stories about where they do analysis for where there's an approval cycle. I've seen this multiple times. An approval cycle where, for example, a salesperson has to get approval like 4 levels up for certain things. And it turns out that 99% of the time, everybody says yes. Huge waste of resources and business. And there's a reason why it came there in the first place, but those reasons are no longer valid. In the world of engineering, what I find is for software or software-intensive systems, there's a huge buildup of shortcuts they've taken over the years. And all of a sudden, they're going a lot slower. And everybody's complaining about going a lot slower, but there's an investment to get that lead weight off the back of the car. And people don't know how to diagnose it. They don't know how to get that lead weight off the back of the car.
All right. Can you give a couple more examples of how technical debt would manifest based on your experiences working with organizations? Remember, we're offering a diagnostic here. So it sounds like you really are suggesting that, folks listening to this podcast should consider, let's diagnose the degree to which we suffer from a technical debt problem that we should do something about. So maybe you could help us with some more diagnostic points. What are the questions we would ask? Let's pretend, we're in the board of directors, we're in the C-suite.
Well,
We don't know all this engineering stuff and how things get done, brought to market. We're going to walk down the hall and talk to engineering. What are we looking for?
I'll give you 2 or 3 levels of diagnostics. Level 1 is this. It's a simple one. Do you feel like you're going slower than you used to? And let me give you an example. One of the customers I was talking to was complaining about their engineers, and I said, they're going too slow. Explain to me why you think they're going too slow. And here's the thing. We were number 1 in the marketplace for so long. And now our competitors are getting innovations out to the field faster than us. And these are new competitors. How can they be doing this? We have more experience. We have more depth of knowledge. And they're beating us every single quarter. And we're starting to lose our market share. that is the number one diagnostic. If you find that's happening to you, there's probably a root cause that your people are still good. They're not slackers, etc. They're carrying that lead weight. And that means you have to dive a bit deeper.
Okay.
So I'll go to the next deeper. So again, this gets into where you want to look where the waste is. And there's various ways to find this. What I did and I'm going to go to the world of engineering, I know best. I have done this with hotels and other things too, but those are kind of widely dispersed ideas, but the concept is the same. You look at two kind of proxies for speed, if you will. One is, how long does it take you to get something done in one part of the system compared to another part of the system? Because there's some parts of the system that are new. They're still clean. Does that make sense? Clean? The first time you build something, it's probably pretty slick. There's not a lot of crud on it. There's not a lot of things. And so we did this for the organization I'm talking about. I said, let's take a look at the clean system that's you all believe is well architected, et cetera, the part that you think is bad. Everybody says it's bad. Let's look at that. And we found there was a 10x speed difference between the clean system and the bad system. And it was eye-opening because people were just thought that it had to be that way. So then you go to third level diagnostic and start to look at the parts of the bad system. Now they did this rough diagnostic. Where are the hangups? And then you can determine how to do an investigation. I've started to get into the how to after this, so maybe I'll stop with the diagnostic.
No. I'm interested in part of the diagnostics. How do I go discover the depth and the challenge of the problem, right? So you're right on spot on here. What am I looking for, right? So the follow-on question here, if you don't mind, is, all right, so let's pretend you're working with an organization. We're doing that deep dive. What am I looking for? What kinds of reports, data, documents? So we're talking about value stream maps at some level or some kind of, 80-20 Pareto now. I mean, what's the nitty gritty I want to find? I want to ask for as the executive of my team.
Absolutely.
What am I looking for?
Absolutely. One is, instead of complaining to your group about going too slow, I'm going to give you a very simple answer first. There's some deeper ones depending on the domain. Ask for people to come to you with ideas of how to go faster as an organization. But with that idea, they have to come with an ROI. Return on investment. I did an acronym, but your audience will know that one. But this is what typically happens. I find in multiple organizations, people know what some of the problems are, but they whine about it. And management, and the people in the organization hear management whining because they think we're going too slow, and that's what they hear is whining, go faster. And the people in the organization are saying, well, here's our problems, but the management hears whining. Change it from whining into ROI. And if you force your folks in the organization to come back and analyze this and say, okay, and this doesn't have to be grand engineering of ROI. Here's the thing that's wrong. Here's what we could do to fix it. And here's how long it would take, organizational hours it would take. And once we fix it, here's how much faster we would go. And here's the ROI. And what's amazing about this, just forcing people to think this way, it transforms the mindsets of both the executives and the people under them. Because I've seen things happen like this. An engineer said, hey, I'll give you an example, Alan, that even you can understand. Now, I appreciated that. So, and he explained this thing, and he said, if this happens every time, this happens 20 times a year, and it takes us about 3 or 14 weeks to deal with this, when we should be able to deal with it in a day. And I said, that's interesting. How long would it take to fix? He said, about 3 days it would take me to fix. And I said, you've been living with this for 5 years? And he looked at me really embarrassed. He goes, yes. I said, let's calculate the ROI right now. We did. I said, I expect this to be fixed by the next time we talk. Here's the problem. Here's where executives don't have it easy. You've heard of the middle management black hole?
Mhm.
The engineer took the idea to the middle management layer for decisions, and they said, we don't have time for that. And I said, don't stop there. You got to go back. And he went back. He got it fixed, immediate benefits, and all of a sudden people became addicted to the ROI candy. But you got to get people getting very specific about this. We have a workshop on this that's really fun. It's a 4-hour ROI workshop because it turns out most of the people in the org do not know how to do this. A little bit of training, they can really master it.
And I don't suppose you would have some kind of a checklist or a little white paper or something for people that want to learn more about it. Or just the concept of how
the best, there's a lot of details that we're working on, but in the book Lead with Speed, there's entire sections about how to look at this, how to think about this, and the questions you should ask. So Alan Willett, Lead with Speed, available in Kindle, Audible, hard copy.
Perfect. So we're talking about doing things faster, and I'm listening to that, and it's occurring for me that we talk about the ROI. So we're talking about ROI. We're talking about doing things faster, and I'm guessing that when you say faster, there's multiple nuances to what we mean by faster, right? It's in terms of how long it takes to get this product or service through a cycle of design, development, and release, and the amount of elapsed time, elapsing that. Right, that's faster. So you're getting to market quicker, which is earlier to market, and that's where the ROI is. We're being able to sell into the market much quicker than we would have otherwise. And then the other part of faster, if I'm hearing it correctly, would be generating a product, right? The result, the organizational result, with a much less effort. So in other words, instead of spending 2,000 engineering hours to get this thing released, we're doing it with 1,000 engineering hours, which means, I'm getting a lot more done with people I have, which puts a lot less pressure on us from a manpower perspective, the forever labor shortage being the challenge. And B, from a cost perspective, we're bringing down the cost of development significantly, which can translate to either developing a lot more products and services than we did before with the same workforce, or being able to cope with not being able to hire the people we'd like to.
Okay. Yes. 3 things buried in that, Ron. I'll just note this. One is speed to value is my key phrase. Because speed is nothing. I've worked in multiple organizations where they said, we got to go faster. And I said, faster to where? They could not answer that question. I won't even name the industry. I think it's embarrassing for them. They said, we want to go faster. I said, why? It took me an hour to get there. It finally was our competitor are getting innovations out to the field faster than us. And I said, are you measuring that? They said, what? I said, how often are they beating you to the field? How often are you beating them to the field? They did not have that measurement. And I said, how often does that make a significant difference to your revenue? They did not have that measurement. So you want to go faster. Be clear why you want to go faster and where you're going. Number 2, I think that's the most important part, by the way, especially when you're working in the big industries with big market share. It doesn't matter how many people are on that if you're getting it out to the field faster and making the revenue. If you can get more efficient, that's good. But you don't want efficiency at the expense of losing your speed to value. The intense competition is really critical. So the second thing I want to say was, I do believe in this. They say, innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. What I find most organizations don't need help on the 1%. They need help on the sweating faster.
Exactly.
And that's where a lot of what I work to is. That's where the technical debt part is, and that's where the wisdom gap is. It's really helping folks just figure out what's wrong with their engines of innovation. How can they make their engines of innovation faster? How do we get the lead weight off the back of the car? How do we get our people to understand how to innovate faster? And that gets into the wisdom gap part. Did you want to go there today?
Yeah, let's absolutely go there next. You had how you wanted to talk about this today, but I really got fascinated with this initial
fine.
part. And I thought that was crucial from a foundation perspective for the audience to understand, what are we looking for? Why are we looking for that? How can we monetize, right? Be faster to market, more productivity out of the development organization. By the way, these ideas that Alan's sharing is not limited to just engineering. It's any complex processes to develop and produce a result, and that's certainly manufacturing and everything about it. But then it extends into any industry where you're developing service or products that are not necessarily tangible. It's a very universal concept. So let's move on to, what would be the next diagnostic around, how do you determine and measure this wisdom gap thing, for example?
Great question. Here's what we looked at. And by the way, I just say these are applicable to any industry. One of the organizations I consulted with was an outdoor adventure for young people from like 5 to 20. And that was interesting. Same principles apply, even the wisdom gap. Because here's how you look at the wisdom gap. By the way, if you're a startup, probably everybody is already in the throes of being overwhelmed, et cetera, has this. I'm not worried about startups with a wisdom gap. It's more the long-lived organizations. And the long-lived organizations are the one that get the most technical debt and they have the most problem with the wisdom gap. And here's what I've really recommended people do. Measure it first and measure it over time. What we have found the best threshold is look and see how many people are in the engines of development. I want to focus on innovation again. Not everybody in the organization, but the ones that are really driving. For the engineering organizations, it's the scientists and engineers. And other organizations, it's whatever is driving the innovations to their field. Hotels is going to be different than outdoor adventure. It's going to be different. How are we distinguishing ourselves? So what I say, the data we look at is typically how many people have more than 15 years experience in the organization over time, and how many people have less than 5 years of experience. And where we see the wisdom gap is when that number of people with 15 years is going down like this, and this one is going up like this. And there is a way to address this.
All right. Is there anything else you want to share from a diagnostic? I think maybe something wrong.
Sure.
Culture or mentoring might be in the mix here.
Yeah, there's two other ones that really are worth looking at.
Okay.
The other one is, I got to go back, Ron. One of the things you and I talked about before around your supper table and with lots of other consultants, we asked people what they were doing in their 30s, young 20s, very young 30s. And to a T, the people that were experts in the field or leaders in their organization had enormous responsibility when they're in their 20s and 30s. And I look at like the Apollo missions, which are famous. Those that haven't know about Apollo 13 can watch the movie. You're going to notice everybody in mission control is young, and that's because they were. The average age was 28. Enormous responsibility. By the way, there was people over 50 in the room. So yes, there was people 21 in the room. Enormous responsibility. I know, Ron, you were responsible for the supply chain for Epcot Center. How old were you?
Well, I wasn't responsible for supply chain, but I was leading a group of planners doing some pretty detailed program evaluation, review technique, capacity constraint, planning for all the manufacturing for Epcot, just leading a small team doing all that work. But yeah.
Yeah, but huge responsibility. I had huge responsibility. So the next one I got to ask is how many people under 30 have a huge amount of responsibility in your organization? What I find in a lot of the long-lived organizations, when I walk around, the people under 30 don't have barely any really critical responsibility. They are not being forged by the fire to create the future. And we need to change that to build your future. And that gets to the mentoring one. The other one I find is, do organizations have a culture of mentoring? And the key question, is it working? Because a lot of organizations have mentoring programs, but they're just a lip service. People come in and they say, oh, here's your mentor. And people might meet with them once. And it's usually something about career mentoring or how to get to know what the social clubs are in the organization. It's not about holding the people accountable to have really large responsibility, and provide the technical and political guidance to get their projects done. And that's what the kind of mentoring I know needs to exist. So
what's the evidence I would look for as an executive to determine whether or not our mentoring program is in fact actually effective? How do I measure that? How do I understand what am I looking for to determine that's a gap?
Okay, a great question. One is, I believe in just talking to a lot of people. This one's, again, I'm going to start with the easiest. Talk to the young people in the organization and say, ask them one, do they know who their mentor is? That's a good one. You'll be surprised how many people don't. And then ask them, what has the mentor been doing with them? How have they helped them improve their technical and skills to get things out to the job? If they can't answer that question, it's not working. It's really that simple.
Okay.
The other thing to look at is really, are there young people that are stepping up and taking big responsibilities, even outside their circle of job responsibility? What I have found is the people that have been mentored well are taking on responsibility beyond their jobs. They're looking at the technical debt issues, for example, and saying, I can fix this. They lead a multinational task force because they volunteer to do so. If there's good mentoring, you see these people stepping up and taking these things. And almost certainly there's a mentor behind them grinning.
All right, cool. Well, let's pivot now. I mean, we took extra time on the diagnostic, which is very important because it's a complex concept and there's some moving pieces here. And let's just pivot now and take a little time now and get into, okay, great. We've evaluated, and yes, in fact, we have significant, knowledge gaps, wisdom gaps. We have significant technical debt. Really not really particularly good at mentoring, et cetera. So give us your advice. What do you go do to close those gaps? What are the action items that should be taken to close those gaps?
Okay. One, if you have the wisdom gap, and I bet there's a lot of organizations out there that do, ask yourself these questions as executives, as leaders. How often do we turn to the people that are in their final years in the job, final 5 years, and give them the big responsibility when there's somebody young in the background that you can give that responsibility to? My very strong recommendation is give it to the young people and make the senior people a mentor. 2, senior people actually, I am learning, don't know how to do this technical mentoring. So one of the things we do is we run a workshop about how to do amazing mentoring. Going backwards, Ron and I and many others won the serendipity lottery in a lot of ways. What I mean by that is they have the 5 elements that your organization has to put in place. Number 1 I'm talking about is give people the opportunity to have extreme pressure and opportunity. People complain about young people not having the same worth ethic as us. A lot of times it's because we haven't given the opportunity to rise. Give them the opportunity, give them responsibility, and let them know they're there, it's their job. And they have a mentor, not as a complete safety net, but as a wisdom dispenser to help them be successful. These are things that we had without knowing it, I believe. The third thing is start to create a community of mastery. And what I mean by community of mastery, we often have community of practices, which is, where planners get together, et cetera. I'm talking about communities of mastery, the critical few people that want to actually change the world, that are obsessed with getting better at this. Start to get your mentors and critical young people together in this community of mastery with special events where you bring in expert speakers like Ron, myself, or others in Ron's amazingly big circle, bringing them as speakers or small workshops just for the community of mastery. Because what we're finding is it's a critical few that can change the world. In fact, that's the only way it's ever happened, the critical few. If you can motivate and align that critical few, you're going to do amazing things for technical debt, for the wisdom gap, etc. So again, give the young people responsibility, give them the technical mentors that actually know how to mentor, create the community of mastery, and you're going to just change the world.
All right. And all that presupposes that you did your homework up front and got very, very careful around defining what do we mean by do things faster? What is, the business outcome we're looking for? And very carefully aligning, I'll call it corporate strategy stuff with, what are our, at the higher level, what's our basis for competing in 5 years and backing that down to where are the gaps between where we want to be as an organization versus where we are, and then really getting the diagnostic right to, okay, right, so who needs to do things differently and what's that going to look like, and then backward engineering into that better process for the future. And what you're suggesting is, okay, that's pretty mechanical, what you're suggesting is that the soft side of this, the people side of this, needs a whole lot more attention than perhaps traditionally organizations think about.
Yes. And Ron, every time I talk to you, I feel like you make me a little bit smarter. I appreciate it. Because I want to put together what you said with what I said. So really, it is about, not just speed to market, but speed to value, speed to innovation that makes a difference. And underneath that, what we're saying, and I think this is, you made me put this together in a new way, is we got to look at the critical few that are driving that. And then we got to look at, for that critical few, where's the wisdom gap? Where's the technical debt? And how do we address that vital difference? And that can just drive everything else. So back to you, Ron.
Awesome. Any other advice for our audience in terms of what to go do?
Of course. Stay passionate. Stay focused on doing good in the world. I think those are the key principles that drive me, and I find that the leaders that are obsessed with that do good in the world. They make their organizations better, and they have a lot more fun doing it.
Awesome. Well, this has been terrific, and I just personally enjoyed talking with Alan anyway, and I'm hoping the audience is getting some gems of wisdom that you can take away and things to consider. So, Alan, let's wrap it up here. If folks want to get in touch with you, ask questions about what you said, learn more about how to tackle these problems, how do they get in touch with you?
Our website is exceptionaldifference.com, and my email address is alan@exceptionaldifference.com.
All right. Keeps it simple.
Oh, yeah. Alan, A-L-A-N, just to be clear. There we go.
Spelled out A-L-A-N at exceptionaldifference.com, which is, by the way, a really good brand. I like it a lot. So with that, Alan, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Ron. I look forward to the next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.